in the process of writing a lot of the stuff that I've written about for License to Queer and doing all the podcasts and things, I've dealt with a lot of psychology, although all of that is self-taught. So I hope I've not got half of it wrong. I thought it was about time that I actually had a conversation with an actual psychologist about some of this stuff. So I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast, and there's a video version over on YouTube as well, to an actual psychologist, not just a psychologist, but a principal clinical psychologist. And I know that Dr Dunlop is going to explain what that is to us. Hello, Brendan.
Hiya, David. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm a clinical psychologist. Kind of the principal bit is a fancy NHS speak, really, just for just to kind of say, you know, what I kind of do in the NHS. So yeah, in my NHS role, I work in a kind of a leadership team for a psychological profession called the associate psychological practitioners. And then I also work at university, teaching, lecturing, researching, supervising other trainee psychologists, mainly on queer focused mental health. So yeah, I don't know if it's helpful for me to say what a clinical psychologist actually does, or do you think people might know a little bit about that?
I don't know. I only know because I've advised students in the past who want to go into psychology. Psychology in all the schools that I've worked in has been an incredibly popular A-level. In fact, it's always been one of the two most popular A-levels. And so I've kind of had to read up about what psychologists do. And I've got to be honest, if I had my time again and my school had been offering it as an A-level, I would 100% have taken it as an A-level, because everything I've read about psychology, and as I say, I've probably got half of it wrong, but everything I've read about psychology over the years, particularly with the queer focus, I've really enjoyed. So as my understanding, and this is going to become a pattern through this podcast, I think, if I say something and I do say something stupid, please do correct me, Brendan. So I'm desperate to learn about all of this stuff. But a clinical psychologist kind of deals with theory about mental health difficulties and then kind of puts it into action. So it's kind of a mixture of theory and action. Is that about right? Or is that completely way off the mark?
Yeah, do you know what? I think that's not bad. That's not a bad start, probably.
Oh, you're being so polite. Put me right.
Well, you're right. We are kind of reflective scientist practitioners is kind of what the term is that's used quite a lot. So we are scientists in the sense of we do research, and we are all trained to do research and kind of audit and evaluating services. But then we're also practitioners in the sense of we do individual therapy, kind of couples, group therapy, whatever kind of that individual has been trained in, I guess. And we also work with teams and organizations to help them understand maybe difficulties at a higher level, but also how they can maybe adapt and change the way in which they work or deliver things to create a bit of a trickle-down effect of positive mental well-being in organizations, perhaps, you know, like schools. You know, clinical psychologists sometimes will consult with schools. So yeah, and a big chunk of our role is also supervising the next generation of psychologists as well, and teaching and kind of mentoring other professionals as well, if appropriate.
So you spend more time, again, please correct me if I get this wrong, you spend more time kind of teaching the next generation of psychologists than actually practicing interventions with patients. Is that about right?
Some people, that's right. That's probably kind of true of me as well. I guess I do a lot more kind of teaching, training, and supervising at the moment. But I do see a bunch of clients as well for individual therapy. But some psychologists, depends where they work really, could be seeing people, you know, 5 or 6 people a day. And that could be what they do in their role. And that's what I think is beautiful about being a clinical psychologist, is there's so much variety. You know, you can work in universities, you can work in schools, prisons, hospitals, physical health, mental health. You can be doing so many different things, and you can specialize and become really niche in one area, or you can kind of keep your skill set fairly broad. So it's yeah, it's a really interesting and fulfilling career to be in, really. So yeah, I definitely encourage other people to look into it if they're interested.
And before we go any further, I have to point out the way that I found out about yourself was from your amazing book, which I did post about on Instagram a couple of months ago, as soon as I finished reading it, and then I bought several copies of for lots of my nearest and dearest to my extended queer family to kind of to have a read of. You'll see that I've got little bookmarks in mine because
Yeah.
there are certain things that I keep going back to. So yeah, this is only being published this year, hasn't it? 2022, is that right?
Yes, it was published in March. Yeah.
Yeah. So what motivated you to write the Queer Mental Health Workbook?
Do you know what? I think for throughout my training to be a psychologist, I'd always kind of had ideas about what specifically queer people may benefit from, because a lot of the stuff that I was reading and working with was fairly generic, you know, because, you know, theories and therapies are fairly generic when they're first created. So I was thinking, you know, something like CBT, which stands for cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, the way that that's delivered is not always necessarily through a specific lens or with a specific focus for a particular group of people. So I thought something like CBT can be great for members of the public, but what about if your experience is slightly different and maybe the way in which you think or feel is very much connected to your identity or your existence in a world, which makes that identity difficult to embrace. So I was thinking, do you know what? There's some little techniques and tips that I would like to talk with queer people about that are a bit more specific to them. So I started kind of thinking about all these different ideas. Some people I was working with. So when I was training, I did work in a HIV service as well with a good chunk of people from the queer community. So, you know, some of these ideas and stuff I would use with them in sessions as well. And I was thinking, oh, do you know what? Actually, some of the feedback I'm getting is not bad about these ideas, and they seem to be kind of striking a chord with people in some kind of way. So then, you know, with lockdown happening, everyone reacted to lockdown in different ways. I found myself, you know, in, I guess, a pretty fortunate position that I had a house, you know, I had, I was in my training. So I was I didn't necessarily have any of those types of worries that I know other people had. So what I had was a little bit of extra time. And I thought, do you know what? I'm going to use some of this time when I can't leave the house and I can't meet up and socialize with people to actually start writing this. And that is basically, David, where it came from. You know, it was lockdown.
A lockdown project.
Yeah, it almost allowed that space to do it and to actually start getting it down on paper. I don't know if I would have done it otherwise, because I would have thought to myself, oh, I'll do that next week or I'll do that next month. And I don't know if it would ever, would have happened. So
I found I started Licensed Queer exactly almost exactly 2.5 years ago. Same sort of reasons. I did have a bit of extra time because we couldn't go anywhere, but I was also working from home and I was just so in work mode I couldn't switch my brain off. And you know, I'm sure you're immediately thinking what the terms are for this, but I always describe it as, you know, I needed to give my brain different food to chew on, because I was thinking about work all the time, even when I wasn't working. So I couldn't make a break between work and kind of home life. So I had to give my brain something else to do. So I set about writing all this stuff and doing these podcasts and things because it had been in my head for so long. And I thought, okay, now's the actual opportunity to do this. So but I always write very autoethnographically, and there are quite a lot of there's quite a lot of bits in here which are kind of revealing of kind of your own mindset. In particular, I was interested, you were saying that I'm sure there's an example you give in here of how you had to be quite disciplined with yourself with this. You wouldn't carry on writing this book after 8 p.m. at night because you were kind of thinking, you know, you wouldn't be, it would actually affect your mental well-being. So clearly you were thinking about, you know, this was kind of a, was it sort of kind of a release or an escape of some kind during lockdown? But at the same time, it was also kind of like, you know, I'm getting obsessed with writing this. How do you view the book now that you've finished it? Obviously, incredibly proud of it.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because I was thinking to myself, when you I think I had a lot of doubts when I was writing the book, because I thought I don't feel qualified to be able to do this, was my honest thoughts. Because at the time when I was writing the majority of it, I was a trainee psychologist as well.
Right.
So there was a part of me that was thinking, I don't know if I'm the best or most qualified person to write this. And that's what I was kind of thinking to myself, gosh, like, I wonder if it will get torn apart, you know, and that people will just think it's rubbish. So there was a bit of that doubt that was kind of creeping in. But then I think, as I kind of say to people in the book, I was trying to practice elements of what I preach and kind of say to myself, okay, that's a thought I have. That's a worry that I have. But also, let's look at the flip side of that, that there isn't a resource like this that exists that I've come across. So that's a reason to write it. I have some knowledge on this topic, and admittedly, I won't know everything. And that's, do any of us ever know everything about things? And then also I was thinking, you know, if I don't write it, I wonder who will. You know, so there were kind of ways in which I was challenging that thought, or kind of testing that thought, if you like. But yeah, I think the example you may be referring to is when I talk to people about compassionate letter writing, almost writing a letter to yourself. And yeah, I will admit, in the spirit of honesty, I wasn't very good at following that piece of my own advice, because I would write quite late into the evening. You know, sometimes it was midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, wow, I'm still here typing. But also, again, being calm with myself, I was thinking, actually, those were the evenings where I was maybe really on a roll. I thought there's stuff that's coming out here that I really want to talk about. So it didn't feel too taxing. It was kind of like, oh, it's 8 o'clock, that's cool. Type. Oh, it's 1 a.m. What's happened? You know, which I'm sure most of us have done in some kind of way in our life, whether that's watching Netflix and suddenly it's 6 hours have passed, or, you know, writing or working or something, you know. So I think it can be quite normal as well.
I think so. It's quite interesting you using the word normal. I was like, I've tried to condition myself never to use the word normal because you know, normative, but I'm just like, stop thinking, you know, you're not normal. But yeah, we all have, I think we all have those creative bursts. I think a lot of people hearing this will kind of be reassured though, you know, call it imposter syndrome or whatever. But a lot of people will hear it thinking, well, actually, for, you know, someone such as yourself who's produced, honestly, I think there are a couple of people I've lent this book to who said this book has been life-changing. So, and I'll be honest, I wish I'd had this book years ago, because I've read lots of sort of self-helpy type books, more towards the scientific end of the spectrum. A few, no, there aren't that many out there written specifically for queer audiences, but this is the first one that I've ever come across, which is an actual workbook. And it's worth stressing this. You can even download extra versions from your website of the worksheets. And they are things that I know some of my work colleagues are really interested in using in schools. So I think you've done people an incredible service here, Brendan. So yeah, thank you for writing it.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's really nice to hear something external, you know, kind of some external
Even you
feedback.
need validation, don't we?
Yeah,
Don't
exactly.
we all?
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that some people have found utility in it, because that's what I hope. From cover to cover, people might not love all of it, but if they love a little bit of it, or they find a little bit of use in some of it, then I think that's probably job done in a way.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, a lot of the things that I have written in the last 2.5 years, I think we're clocking up to about, with all the other contributors, there's about 15, 16 other people. We're clocking up 250,000 words. And at least half of those touch on aspects of mental health. So I didn't intend that to begin with. I just had this idea in my head around, queer points of view on James Bond, because a bit like you, I was like, I want to write. I'm waiting for someone to write this. No one has written it yet. I'm just put my money where my mouth is and go for it. And lots of other people have joined in, which is absolutely brilliant. But we end up touching on mental health issues a lot, and even people who just read the website, and people who and not even queer, actually, a lot of the time, say that they were quite affected by some of the issues that we bring up in a usually a positive way, because we always try to, if we're dealing with dark stuff, we always try to kind of, sometimes it does almost end up turning into a bit of an advice piece sometimes. So I think writing's really good for helping us process some of those things. Although I have said numerous times, my obsession with James Bond is borderline worrying, because, and I'm not alone on this, there are, it's normal for a lot of Bond fans to filter everyday experiences through the lens of James Bond, and even go to the point of, what would James Bond do in this situation? And it's like, oh my God, what is going on here, Brendan? I mean, I'm hoping there is a piece of terminology for this, that we're not all just, losing the plot. Yeah. What is going on?
Yeah. Do you know what? So a lot of clinical psychologists approach the world from probably a different way to other mental health professionals. So a lot of so for example, psychiatrists who are medically trained doctors are sometimes really keen on thinking about what the label is that corresponds to someone's experience. Clinical psychologists, we use something which is called formulation, which is, I guess, it's putting together the jigsaw for people. It's the creation of a story of their experience that makes sense to them, for how and why they might have got to the situation or experience that they are in. So when you describe that, I always think to myself, do you know what? There might be a label for that somewhere, but it's not one that I think I would give someone, because I think if it's something which you enjoy and it's something which you get a lot out of, it's in line with your values as an individual, and it's not hurting you or anybody else, kind of, I'm a bit like, crack on. You kind of live your best life. It's different if someone was to come to me, for example, and say, in a therapy session, I'm doing this behavior or I'm thinking this way, and it really stresses me out, it really worries me, it leads me to do dangerous things. Then I'd be saying, let's maybe think about what we can do to change that. But if someone says to me that they have something, an interest, a hobby, or something which they thoroughly enjoy, it kind of helps them, it gives them something back, I think that's cool.
Anyone listening to this, because it's the hardcore Bond fans who listen to these. Anyone listening to this has just gone, oh, thank God he's just said that. Although their partners may not be singing your praises.
Well,
because some of us Bond fans do have long-suffering partners who know that when we choose the next holiday destination, it's going to have some kind of Bond connection.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're not going.
But do you know what, David? Wouldn't partners of people that love football say the same thing? Or, some other kind of hobby or interest, or, golf. A lot of people in my family like to play and watch golf. I think they're poor partners as well, because all they want to do is just go to the driving range or whatever and hit these golf balls all the time. So yeah, I get what you're saying about it can impact other people.
I was being slightly facetious there. You know, my husband is very tolerant of my Bond obsession, but
Well, good. And it's also important to make sure that, yeah, through our hobbies and interests, we do attend to the important things like our relationships as well.
And a lot of people do say their obsessions, whether it's James Bond or whatever, help them deal with issues, difficulties. I'm loath to use the term mental health kind of issues. Is this more standard terminology, more difficulties nowadays? I've read that in some sources.
Yeah, do you know what? So I will often be led by what the person that
Right.
I'm speaking to wants to use.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will say to me, mental health issues, mental health difficulties.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will say mental illness if that's how they view themselves.
Problems.
Mental health problems. I
Yeah.
sometimes just say mental health experiences,
Yeah.
because actually we all experience different things that are positive. We experience things that are negative, so, or helpful or unhelpful. So yeah, I use the term mental health experiences, but
Yeah.
it's whatever works for you or for anyone that's listening, whatever works for them.
So I'll stick with difficulties, at least for the time being. And
Sure.
Bond has helped me always kind of deal with mental health difficulties. I mean, in my time, and I'm always very open about this on the things I write and with my students as well, trying to beat that stigma. But I was diagnosed with depression in my early 20s, which in hindsight was a lot to do with me being closeted.
Yeah.
And I've had various bouts of anxiety. I've always been a worrisome sort of person, but for various different things that have kind of set me off again. But sometimes seeing James Bond as it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I don't know, does it? A fictional character, and who kind of demonstrates a degree of stoicism in the face of adversity. But at the same time, I'm also aware that there are lots of James Bond fans who perhaps might not take that lesson. I always think James Bond himself is a bit of a Rorschach test. And you sort of look at this fictional character and you take away whatever you kind of bring to it. And I think some people, possibly more men than women, probably look at James Bond and go, oh, actually, the way to deal with mental health difficulties is not to deal with them, but to self-medicate with alcohol, keep all my emotions bound up. And I think at some points in my life, I kind of viewed the character in that way. Now, when I first reached out to you, I said, are you a James Bond fan? And I was thinking, please let Brendan be a James Bond, please let James. So you've watched, obviously. I'm not going to give you a test, I promise. Okay, I'm not even going to ask you who your favorite James Bond is, because I hate that question myself. So I'm not going to inflict any of that on you. But what's your kind of background with Bond?
Yeah, so I think in terms of like a diehard fan, I don't think I would fall into that category. But I remember, I mean, I do love James Bond, and whenever a new James Bond film comes out, myself and my partner, we always try and watch it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And I remember growing up that I think it was like every Sunday afternoon, it was something like Channel 5 or something would show like a James Bond film every week. And I can't remember which summer it was or which year it was, but I remember there being like for like 2 or 3 months solid, it was like a James Bond film every Sunday afternoon on like Channel 5 or something. And it might have been on other channels at other times, but that was my kind of religious time that I would watch it. So, going all the way back to the very kind of early Bond films up to whatever the latest one was at that point. Yeah, I would look forward to that every single week. And I think there was something, I mean, I think I love kind of like fantasy, sci-fi type action thriller stuff anyway. But yeah, there was something about the fact that, Bond always goes to different countries and sees different cultures and different cities. I really loved that element of it, as well as that, yeah, I guess identification in some way with that kind of, wow, this is a really cool person. And wouldn't we all like to in some way be, a Bond type person that can kind of do all these really, really cool things. So yeah, which probably goes back to what you were saying about people can, I guess, project onto Bond the type of things that they want or maybe need from their life at certain points. So yeah, I would say that Bond is not kind of something which I wake up in the morning to and go to sleep to, but it's
Guilty.
I didn't want to say anything.
I'm not gonna feel guilty though.
No, don't feel guilty. Yeah,
No.
it's okay to say, yeah, that's me, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly a film and a franchise and a character which I really enjoy watching, and yeah, maybe today talking about as well, thinking about from a different perspective.
And when you say different perspective, there are still people who say to me, very well-meaning people, they don't mean to be offensive, but they go, "You're a gay man. What do you like about James Bond? Because surely it's just all about the attractive women." I'm just like, that's a small part of James Bond. There's just so much more to it. But did you ever have that thought? It's like, I'm not a straight man. Why do I like this?
I don't think so, I don't think so, because I think I think, as with probably a lot of queer people growing up, when you have a dominant story, which is the idea that if you're a man, a cisgender man, you should think or feel or behave in a certain kind of way. And if you are a man, you will just fancy women, and vice versa. I think there was obviously a bit of a reflection and a bit of an understanding watching Bond and seeing Bond, engaging in relationships and flings with women.
I was going to say relationships a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I use that term loosely maybe for Bond, but kind of seeing that and thinking, is that what I'm supposed to be doing? But then also, I guess internally, as I'm sure most of us do that are queer, we kind of think, well, that's not really what fits with us. So I don't think it was ever off-putting for me in a kind of way. But I think, there must have been a bit of a kind of internal check with that doesn't quite marry up. But then I think that happens with a lot of TV programs and media, doesn't it? Where we don't see a diversity of representation all the time.
And that concept of the dominant story, I'm not sure, to be honest, to what extent James Bond even fits that dominant story. If we kind of carry the dominant story on to, get married, have 2.4 or 2.3 or whatever it is, kids, the dog, the whatever, all that, die. If we kind of follow that, Bond doesn't follow that dominant story in lots of ways.
No, he doesn't, but I think there's something about his alpha masculinity that almost gives him a bit of a get out clause from that. And I think people can kind of view that and think, oh, the way in which he behaves is so cool that he almost doesn't need to have a kind of faithful relationship, if that's what the dominant story is. It's almost like he doesn't need to have children if that's what the dominant story is, because he does so many other masculine things that almost cancel it out, which I think could be for some people a really liberating thing, the idea that you don't have to follow the crowd, you don't have to do what everyone else is doing. But I think it's also a bit of a dangerous thing, in that it kind of makes us as viewers see masculinity and those kind of masculine features as the thing to achieve and aim for, and also perhaps masculinity is a bit of a get out clause for a lot of stuff. Oh, that's just what men do.
I thought it was quite interesting that a lot of the hatred towards the last Bond film, where Bond actually has a child, came from a lot of straight men. And I couldn't help think that there was a bit of kind of, oh, he's no longer living his fantasy life. He's got what I have.
Yeah, people don't get that escapism anymore from their own lives, which maybe they found solace in Bond, you know. And I think
Good
that's
choice of words there. You're earning Bond points.
well, I actually chose that word very
I
specifically.
know. I could
I'm a
see.
bit internal check. But yeah, you mentioned this earlier about, kind of Bond's use of substances quite a lot. And
Yeah.
I think that speaks to a much broader pattern of behavior which Bond engages in, which is, I guess it's ultimately avoidance, isn't it?
Mm.
So I think Bond is avoiding feeling something by
Okay.
numbing it out. I
Yeah.
think Bond probably avoids the need to connect with his emotions by being always hyper adrenaline fueled. It's much
Yeah.
easier to feel adrenaline than maybe feel sad or anxious. And I think he also maybe avoids emotional intimacy
Mm.
through kind of almost subverting that through physical and sexual intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think avoidance is a key strategy that Bond uses.
That's really interesting, because although I've written about each of those things, those examples you just mentioned, I've never really put it under that broad heading of avoidance. So next time I write about those, I'll definitely be using that concept there. I suppose there are dangers to continuing avoiding. I had a therapist say to me at one point, because I think I've used those strategies at various points in my life, whether it's burying myself in work or whatever. And the person said to me, said, yes, but at some point, David, you're going to have to get off the treadmill.
Yeah.
And so I suppose there is a danger there of, if you continue to avoid, and Bond throws himself into his work a lot. And that's, again, I think probably a quality that I've emulated from Bond, of several. It's like, do 80-hour weeks occasionally and just throw yourself into it. And in fact, in the Fleming books, he's number one enemy. He's not Mr. Big or Goldfinger or whoever. It's actually his own kind of boredom or ennui or depression. Fleming calls it akidi, but it's essentially depression. That's how most people read it. So Bond is constantly just on the go. He can't sit or stand still.
Yeah.
But that surely got its downsides.
Oh, absolutely. Because there's, as you've alluded to, there's physical exhaustion that can come along with that. But that psychological toll of not being able to confront things, I think there's almost like this analogy that we can use a little bit, I think, which is like, if you have like a splinter or something and you kind of avoid it, over time it can tend to hurt a little bit more. But sometimes, because it starts to hurt a little bit, we think, oh God, I'm not going to pull that splinter out because that's really going to hurt. And, it's this analogy, and I think things can get bigger or feel bigger than they needed to be. And I think what you say is correct. By avoiding things over and over again, what we do is we make the experience, the difficulty, the problem, whatever you want to call it, that was there at the start, seem and feel much, much bigger than maybe it was whenever it was that we started avoiding it. So I think there's something physical about the physical toll of avoidance, but also that emotional and psychological toll of just feeling like that is a much, much bigger thing to manage than potentially it actually is.
I think the Bond films have done more to raise our awareness that Bond is doing these, he's avoiding things more. It's been brought more from, I'm not even sure it was, I think it was always there because as an explanation for why he did certain things. But it has been brought from subtext, and probably in the Daniel Craig era into the text of the films. So you have people even in you have people in the Brosnan films talking about Bond's ego all the time and how he's kind of got defense mechanisms. And so there are kind of psychological terms starting to creep into the dialogue. But then you've got everything from the Daniel Craig era is about having armor and trying to cover up how he's feeling, and you know, he's Silver in Skyfall says all that running, your knees must be killing you. So he's talking about that physical toll as well as mental toll. I wonder if you think that's because we've become more conversant with this kind of terminology, or if it's because maybe we are better at opening up ourselves about mental health difficulties.
I think it's a bit of both, you know. I think we have got a language and a lexicon now to describe things that we previously didn't. So that's part of it. I think there is also a cultural shift as well that we've seen with people of the kind of younger generations, if you like. Certainly, especially with things like social media. Social media obviously gets a bad rap for a lot of stuff, but I think social media also allows younger generations, just because that's what they grew up with, that outlet to connect and be almost a little bit more authentic online than they can be in real life. So because of that, I think that idea of mental health and mental well-being has crept into our lives in more and more ways, especially thinking about you know, actually funding within services like the NHS, that has been given more prominence than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. You know, there are more services. Of course, those services are still not funded adequately, but there are much more services than there maybe was. So I think our media has had to reflect that, whether it wants to or not. It has to reflect the reality. So I think that's maybe why we do see more of that, more kind of named explicitly in the newer Bond films, because it will be more familiar to hear a character talking in that way than it was 40, 50 years ago. So I think directors and producers can kind of bank on that as not being something which will go over people's heads, or it won't be something that people will squirm at, because people kind of connect with that more authentically in their own lives. So it's a safe bet to include that in the films, I think.
Are there any parts of Bond, because, you know, if I start listing all of mine, we'll be here all year, but are there any parts of Bond which kind of strike you as interesting from a psychological point of view?
I think, again, like, I haven't, when you messaged me about this, I hadn't really thought about psychoanalyzing or, you know, kind of thinking about Bond in a psychological way before. But when I was thinking about it, I think Bond's relationship with M, you know, Bond's relationship with strong women is a really interesting one from a psychological perspective, because it tells us a lot in the absence of his more substantial emotional connections with women. We see the sexual and romantic connections, but in terms of the strong emotional connections, we don't get that as much. We get it with a few characters. M being, I think, a character that almost, I think, matches Bond's stoicism, to use your word, in many ways, in the way that she kind of presents herself. But also there's almost like a mutual respect between them, and a kind of real non-verbal understanding of each other and each other's psychology. So I think thinking about Bond's relationships is an interesting point from a psychological perspective, because we know that relationships to others can impact the relationship that we also have with ourselves. So if we so for example, you know, it'll probably come as no surprise to people listening that our early years are super important, because the way in which we receive care from people in our early years, whether that's parents, guardians, whether that's us in a children's home for some people, if we're looked after by the state. The way in which we experience care in those first few years really provides us with a bit of a template, if you like, for what relationships are kind of about. And then as we grow up, we use that template to inform the relationships that we have.
Are we in the field of attachment theory here?
Yes, we are. I was trying to avoid any words.
I'm again. I know we don't want to kind of label too much and whatever, but I've been writing about attachment theory in relation to Skyfall recently. I've actually had to stop writing it. So when this comes out, it might have actually been published, although chances are against it, because I got to 15,000 words writing about Skyfall, and it made me kind of question everything about my own attachment. I was like, okay, I'm going to have to just park that one for a little while, because once you start digging into some of this stuff, it kind of can become quite unsettling and quite uncomfortable. And the more I read about attachment theory, I just thought this kind of explains a lot about James Bond.
Totally. Yeah. So, yeah, I will spare people all of the intricacies of attachment theory, but yeah, it's basically our early years are dead important. They can create templates for us that we can refer back to and fall into, I guess, as we grow up. And of course, important in the attachment theory, if you like, is that idea of when things get tricky for us, when our attachment system, if you like, becomes activated, what do we do? Do we avoid? Do we kind of attack others verbally or physically before they attack us? Do we get really anxious and think that people are going to leave us and abandon us? You know, there's lots of consequences that can come when that attachment system within us is activated. And of course, that goes back to how we were taught to experience care. And I think that's just a really interesting facet for Bond, and is something that, is, I'm sure a therapist or a psychologist sitting with Bond could probably talk at length about his relationships and his attachment styles and patterns, because we evidently, it doesn't look like it's fantastic.
One of my favorite lines in all of Bond to mention, bring up psychology, is when Bond questions the motivation of Alec Trevelyan in Goldeneye, and Trevelyan doesn't like this, so he says, "Spare me the Freud. I might as well ask if all those vodka martinis silence the screams of all the men you've killed, or if you found forgiveness in the arms of all those willing women for the dead ones you failed to protect." So that kind of, that links to attachment theory, because he's constantly going from person to person, and in terms of women, and inflicting violence on men. So, you know, and that film is one of the few to actually mention that James Bond was an orphan as well, which a lot of fictional characters are orphans, but that's probably goes some way to explaining some of Bond's behaviors.
It does, because, you know, if we think about, and there might be people listening that have, you know, grown up without parents as well. But I think if you grow up as an orphan or someone without direct caregivers there, you know, I imagine your sense of the world and your sense of other people is that it's not very consistent.
No.
It's not very predictable. And sometimes what we can also think of ourselves is, I wonder what's wrong with me. You know, why am I the one that was given up, or why was I left by whoever gave birth to me? So of course, you know, that will then filter through as we grow up, and that will stick with us. So of course we can, I guess, make an educated guess, can't we, that James might think about that, and kind of, whether he's aware of it or not, there might be an element of, well, the world is unpredictable, inconsistent, other people are not very available or you know, attentive to my needs. So stuff them.
Yeah, and when he gets close to someone, so the first Daniel Craig film, that I love all the extended metaphor about armor that runs through that film.
Yeah.
So he says to Vesper, 10 minutes before he's betrayed, I have no armor left, you've stripped it from me. And then he lets someone into his life, and then the armor goes back on as soon as he knows he's been betrayed. But then I think even more fascinating from a psychological point of view, one of my favorite scenes is in the follow-up film Quantum of Solace, where he's on an aeroplane downing 6 martinis. I mean, whether that's a boy, I mean, that's just wrong. I'm sorry, that's actually you're incapable. No human being can drink 6 James Bond martinis. Trust me, I've tried. So but he's clearly masking something there. But it seems to me that scene, people read that scene as him mourning the Vesper, the person who's died. But I always interpret that scene as, and again, this is perhaps me projecting, but this is Bond racked with self-loathing in that scene. I'm sure you can read it both ways, but I just don't think James Bond likes himself very much.
Yeah, and you know what? Again, going back to those earlier attachment ideas, of course, if one of those ideas is maybe, why am I weird? Why am I unlovable? Then of course that will impact on our self-esteem and our sense of self-worth. And you know what, David? It's very common. We see a lot of people in that present with mental health challenges that do have aspects of very self-defeating behaviors. That is something which exists, I think, very much on a spectrum. And, at one end of that, well, at the extreme end of that spectrum is people that will take their own lives. That is the ultimate form of self-defeat, isn't it? Obviously that's very contextually wrapped up as well, but then there's elements of self-harm and self-injury, eating disordered behavior, excess alcohol and substance use, but also even those kind of on the kind of, I guess, if you like, inverted commas, milder end of the spectrum, those things of kind of not allowing yourself joyful experiences could also be seen as a bit of a self-defeating, self-loathing thing as well. I know that I'm really going to enjoy going out, whatever, with my friends, but I feel like I don't deserve it. So then someone doesn't go out. Again, I would conceptualize that personally on that kind of self-defeating spectrum. And I think what you're hinting at there is that Bond probably at several points falls along that spectrum, because we could also conceptualize his recklessness as potentially self-defeating in a way, because there's maybe an element of, if I die, I die. It's not actually, it's almost like he doesn't value his life enough for him to be doing a job working in Tesco or something, not that that would ever suit Bond, but there's an element of that, I think, recklessness that also speaks to me on that kind of self-defeating, I don't really care too much for myself level.
Yeah. And even when he dies, a lot of people quote the obituary from You Only Live Twice that was quoted in No Time to Die. And he's actually a Jack London quote from about 120 years ago about that, not wasting, you've lived your life essentially. I'm not going to try and get the quote exact, but the sentiment is, why waste your life in trying to prolong it? Have a good time, sort of thing.
Yeah.
That could be taken in a healthy direction or an unhealthy direction, depending how you want to take it, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. And I think I think it also very much depends on what people's values are really in life. I guess, I don't know, you might be able to speak to this more than I certainly will, but I don't know what James Bond's values are. I don't know what's necessarily important to him and what drives him over and above maybe anger and vengeance and things like that. But actually, I think for the majority of people, I think people usually have some values that they can connect with, like friendship or
I think that's definitely one of Bond's, and I think that's a much overlooked one, actually. People sometimes, I think it's erroneous to see Bond as a lone wolf. I think he has lots of relationships, not necessarily prolonged romantic relationships, but he has lots of friendships with people, and mostly through work. So, he's kind of the archetypal workaholic. He only really has work friends, but he does have, I think, friendship. People often cite duty to Queen and Country, and again that villain, no, it's not that villain. Some villains have chastised him for kind of, what do you believe in? Preservation of capital. It's like it is Queen and Country, really, but a sense of duty, perhaps to his superiors. You mentioned M, so yeah, there's a lot of admirable values there, but I think a lot of people sometimes focus more on the kind of lifestyle aspects of Bond, and the drinking and the gambling and those behaviors, which in moderation, absolutely fine, but Bond takes them to sometimes ludicrous extremes.
I think that's really interesting as well when you mentioned about the friendships being connected to work. I wonder if it's almost something like friendships are only worth something if they're conditional upon a shared vision. Which again, I think speaks maybe to Bond's psychological motivations in some way, and also maybe looking at the flip side of that, maybe his uneasiness with just emotional connection, the fact that maybe he can't connect with someone just for connection's sake. He almost has to connect with someone because they share the same workplace motivation, or they share the same drive to do something. I don't know, but yeah, I think you're right. There are certainly values which you can pull out of Bond, but yeah, going back to that kind of quote about living your life, I guess, hard and fast, or kind of whatever it was. Yeah, I think if you are living a life in line with your values, and you are, again, not hurting anybody else whilst doing that, I think people should, do what makes them happy, and do the things which resonate with them.
And on that note, I think we should try and finish by giving James Bond a quantum more of solace. Sorry, you brought it up earlier, so I couldn't. So if James Bond was a real person, would we have advice to offer him? He might not take it, but
yeah. Oh, I think Bond is someone. If Bond was a real life person, I don't think Bond would do well with just 4 or 5 sessions of support.
No.
I think what advice would I give Bond? I guess the advice that I would give Bond is to probably slow down and notice. That idea of, you mentioned that Bond is always doing something, is always living life fast and kind of adrenaline fueled. I would say probably slow down and notice things more, which Bond does at times because he sips his
food and drink,
and he's, I would encourage more of that as a starting point, just a kind of self-reflection, centering, take time for yourself. My advice for Bond would, I guess, certainly be to think about what's important in your life, and whether you feel like what you're doing at the moment fits in that picture of importance or not. And if it doesn't, what little bits and bobs can you do to make those values and those important things to you shine just a little bit more? I guess those are some super quick little nuggets of advice, but I guess if Bond wanted to explore kind of like his own experiences more, then I think certainly a therapy which was relationally orientated, that was kind of had that real lens on relationships to other people and to himself, would, I think maybe do more for Bond than something like CBT.
Right.
So
are we kind of going into mindfulness territory with noticing more, particularly slowing down eating and drinking and so forth?
Yeah, that's certainly they can be mindfulness based
Yeah.
activities. Yeah, definitely. Mindfulness is certainly a skill. It's something that I tell people about. Me not being very good at, because I think it's important for me to also be honest with people and say when there's things that might work for them, and if they want, bits of um opinion from me, which sometimes people do in therapy, which is okay to ask people, what do you think of that as well? I've sometimes said to people, it hasn't always worked for me, but it might work for you. But yeah, certainly those are kind of mindfulness based activities.
That's
Which
such a relief to hear as well, from yourself, because I've done like a mindfulness course, 8 sessions, like the basics. I've done a 6 weeks CBT through the NHS.
Mhm.
I've paid to see a therapist. I've tried, I don't do medication, but I have tried it in the past and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. And
yeah,
it's kind of like you kind of need. I've always found it kind of bits of all of it, sort of done in a combination, sort of tend to work the best. So, I actually quite like some aspects of mindfulness, and some of it, like the body scanning, I'm like, yeah, okay, clearly I'm not doing this right. Whereas the eating and some of the other bits and pieces, and
mm,
some CBT techniques, not others. And I think that's what's really great about your book, because you can it's all in here. I can't think, I'm sure you're like thinking, well, I didn't have time to write about that, and there's other things I'd want to put in, maybe book 2. But actually, of everything I've kind of ever tried, it is all in these. How many pages are we talking? 270 something pages. And I think people will, as they read through, they'll kind of go, oh, as you said earlier, it's like, nah, that bit's not for me. But then they turn the page and then there's something else.
mm,
So I think
mm.
it's really reassuring to hear you say that to people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course, in the clinical psychology or even the mental health world, people will have different opinions on how much therapists or psychologists should share with people. Um, and I think if you're working with someone, two humans working together to think about challenges or difficulties or experiences, if something resonates with a therapist or with a mental health practitioner, being able to say, do you know what? I wonder if I might be able to share something with you from my own experience. But if you don't want to hear it, that's okay. Because there might be some clients that don't want to hear it, actually, no, I don't want to hear how you found something. Let's just crack on. But by giving someone that option, some people might go, actually, yeah, do you know what? What do you think of CBT or something like that? And yeah, it's something that not all mental health practitioners will necessarily do or kind of think highly of, maybe. But I think it is something which some clients that I've worked with have appreciated. I guess honesty, which is the crux of two people talking together. It rests on honesty and I guess authenticity as well. Um, so yeah, glad to hear that you've kind of found flavors of each thing that kind of
Oh, and a
work.
massive dollop of James Bond.
Yeah,
All of
well,
that, and a massive, James Bond is therapy.
it's James Bond, and then it's little sprinkles of all these other things on top. That's probably what it is.
Yeah,
Um,
probably. Yeah, that's like the underlying bedrock of
yeah,
my mental health, and then everything else kind of, as you say, sprinkled on top,
yeah. Which fab
like the
that
like the
works.
garnish on a martini. Yeah, there we go.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going down an ice cream analogy, but yeah, the that's what I was thinking of in my head, like sprinkling things on an ice cream. But I actually, yeah, quite like the martini one instead.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah, let's do that.